Okay, we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 28 of Outside the Letterbox. I'm Paul Duda, and with me today is Nick Van Lee Shout.
Hey everyone.
Today we're going to be discussing some recent movies we've watched. A lot of stuff that, or at least, well, for me, there's a lot of stuff that's still in theaters, and Nick has some randos on there. But the that I've never heard of, so that should be interesting. And then we're going to talk about just a brief segment on some news, and we'll get to our discussion on this week's blockbuster hit, Jupiter Ascending. So
I don't know, man. Seventh Son might beat it.
I think SpongeBob. We should be doing this podcast about SpongeBob.
I know. I'm kind of wishing I'd seen SpongeBob, but that's
Well, we'll get to that. But first, you can find more episodes of Outside the Letterbox on our website, the-letterbox.com, and on iTunes by just searching for Outside the Letterbox. Leave us a review on iTunes or comment on our site. Yeah, that's our intro. I feel like we should be adding something to that at some point. Like there's something I'm forgetting to tell people to do. But anyway, excuse me. Let's get right down to it. Some recent watches. I'll go first because mine I think are a little more they're like old news now, sort of. So I got a chance to see Paddington in theaters, and I haven't been able to talk about it since I saw it, at least not on the podcast. And it's my favorite movie of 2015 so far, which isn't saying a whole lot, except that
of like the three movies you've probably seen from 2015.
Well, actually, I've seen like 6 because I saw a bunch of the Best Picture nominees in January.
Yeah, but technically those are 2014 movies.
Well, they're 2014 movies, but they're movies that I saw in 2015. So of the movies I've seen in 2015, and I'm serious, Paddington is probably my favorite. I really enjoyed the movie. It's got a lot of Wes Anderson influences in it, which is great. And it's really just super fun and cute and enjoyable and like really kind of clever in a lot of ways that I wasn't expecting it to be. So I definitely recommend anybody check that out, especially if you have kids. It's a great kids movie. The trailers for it are pretty bad. I'm not gonna lie. The trailers for it really turned me off, and I wasn't gonna see it until I saw that people were sort of raving about it. But I really dug it. I thought it was great. So
that seems to be kind of a running thing with kids' movies is like these really horrible trailers that are kind of like hiding something about the movie. Which I mean, I guess in Paddington's case was that it was actually a good movie, but like it seems like you have all of these Disney musicals that came out, but like all their trailers would like completely hide the songs. And then talking about SpongeBob just for a second, I haven't seen it yet. But from the way that trailer looks like, it makes the movie look like it's like 1/3 2D animation and the rest of it is live action CG. But I guess from what I'm hearing, actually like 2/3 of the movie is the traditional 2D animation, and then the end of the movie is all the live action CG stuff they're showing in the trailer. So it's just it's weird to me that it seems like they want to trick people to go see these kids movies with pretty mediocre trailers when the actual results are like 10 times better.
It's weird to me because that actually gives me hope for seeing SpongeBob because I'll probably see it at some point. But I thought the idea of all of it being live action was a little weird.
Yeah.
But with Paddington, they had that gross scene of him like trying to get cleaned up.
Oh yeah.
And like
your thing really bothered me. Like
yeah, like as a trailer, you're just kind of like, oh, this is disgusting. Like
yeah.
And you think it's going to be the type of movie where the main character is just wreaking havoc all the time, and everyone else is trying to deal with it. And that's totally not the case. And actually, in context, that scene is really cute and funny. But as a trailer, I don't know what it was, but it just totally turned me off. And that stinks, because there was somebody that I was actually talking to who I said, oh yeah, I saw Paddington, and they're like, oh yeah, like there's no way I'm taking my kids to see that. That trailer looked terrible. And I was like, well, that stinks because it's a really good movie.
Yeah, I will say, having not seen the movie, but that soundtrack is actually really good.
Yeah, the soundtrack for it is pretty great. So highly recommend checking that out, Nick. I actually think you'd really dig it, especially with the Wes Anderson sort of influences in it.
Yeah, I mean, I've already seen Kingsman, and I don't plan on seeing 50 Shades, so I might have that be my movie next weekend.
Yeah, totally check it out. Another one that I watched that I think all of us on Letterbox have seen, but I don't think we've talked about, have we?
No,
On
I don't think so.
is American Sniper, and I kind of wish Joe was here to talk about it because he's the only one of us that I think really liked it. Not that I disliked it. I just don't. I don't think it was that amazing. It was good. It was a nice tribute to a soldier and to I think all of our armed servicemen and women, but it just wasn't that great of a movie.
Yeah, I didn't like it, and not because of like there are a lot of people who try to turn like a political like oh it's pro-war or oh like it's this thing that's honoring our troops or whatever, and it's like I it just wasn't that well done of a movie. I thought that was kind of my big problem with it.
Yeah,
All the war stuff or most of the war stuff I would say, you know, was pretty well done, but like every time they came back home, it was just really dull and really kind of like I don't know. The stuff back home did not did not sit well with me.
no, and that. Excuse me. I had another chip in my mouth. That first act, to me, the first act was such a mess of like poor acting and
Yeah,
like script writing and weird staging and like on the nose dialogue, like that scene where he comes back and his girlfriend's cheating on him, and she's like, what does she say? She says something like, "Don't you know I'm doing this to get attention?" And it's like, that is an incredibly self-aware thing for someone who just got caught cheating.
yeah.
Say.
And then there was like there are the scenes that like on paper like sound like a good idea, but like the flashback with his dad and whatever, like telling him that he's like a sheepdog or whatever. Like it was like it was so yeah, like it was so on the nose. Um, yeah, and I think especially like coming from Clint Eastwood, like a lot of people don't think Clint Eastwood's movies from the last 10 years have been that great. I don't think I've actually seen a lot of his movies from the past 10 years. I've seen a couple of them, but if you go a little further back, like if you go to something like Unforgiven or Outlaw Josie Wales or even like Flags of Our Fathers, like those are stories that like handle similar themes to this. So it's kind of a shame that this one is in the same ballpark, but doesn't at all like achieve it on the level that those films did.
Yeah, and again, we're not saying anything. Obviously, it's based on a true story, so it's kind of a tough film to critique, and we don't mean to say anything against the people that it's based on. I just think as a movie, it's sort of a bit of a mess.
Yeah.
So that was American Sniper. The last thing that I've watched recently, which I actually just watched today, is a little independent. I don't actually know where it was produced, but it's in Polish, so I'm guessing it was made in Poland. Is a movie called Ida, which is this.
Isn't that nominated for something?
Is it nominated for Best Foreign Film?
And I think cinematography too. I think it was one of those foreign films that kind of gets recognized across the in a lot of other categories.
So it is apparently it came out in 2013 in Poland, but it's nominated for Best Foreign Language Film and Best Cinematography. And it totally deserves it for at least cinematography because, man, it's shot in a 4:3 format in black and white, and I think it was actually shot in black and white, not post-converted. And it is a beautiful film. Like Nick, I don't know how much time you spend on Instagram, but if you go on Instagram and you try and find cool black and white photos, like this movie, every single shot is like looks like the best Instagram black and white photo you can possibly find.
I'm trying to find a quote because I read something where the director or the cinematographer, I can't remember who it was basically like they had no idea what they were doing when they were shooting that movie. So it's just kind of funny that they wind up with an Oscar nom.
That's hilarious because it's absolutely beautiful. Because I bet what he means is just that they weren't like technically proficient cinematographers,
Yeah,
and they were probably just doing what looked nice to them.
yeah, I think
And
that's what he meant. I'll try
and
to find the quote if I can, but
yeah, it totally pays off. It's an absolutely beautiful film. It's a really sad movie. It's about a girl who's getting ready to take her vows as a nun, um, uh, who finds out that she's Jewish and that her aunt is still alive. And this is like in the 1960s, I think. So um, it's a while after World War II. She finds out that her aunt is still alive, and she goes to see her aunt and sort of talk to her aunt about what happened to her family. And it's a very sad kind of movie, but it's very beautiful and it's very short, kind of to the point. So yeah, it's I think it's worth watching if that kind of thing interests you. And you can watch foreign films.
on Netflix, right?
It is on Netflix right now. It's also, at least in LA, it's playing in a few theaters. Um, yeah, I definitely say check it out if you have the opportunity. So yeah, that kind of covers it for me. What about you, Nick?
So I'm too cheap to buy a Hulu Plus account, but thankfully every week Criterion kind of puts out like they'll have like a theme and they'll put like 10 movies out and they'll be available for like a week or whatever. So sometimes it'll be like the same director or a certain actor or whatever. So I've been watching a lot of uh, different movies that way. Like I'm trying to look back. Like a couple weeks ago, they had like religious themes. They had a bunch of like Ingmar Bergman stuff. And last week, last week they had I guess it was a bunch of like movies related to Africa or whatever. So I watched one that sounded interesting, and it was called let me remember. Oh, Death Drums Along the River, and like it looked exciting, like the poster and whatever. And I started up, and it opens up, and there's like a shipping dock in Africa, and they're unloading these boxes and stuff, and this object falls out, and these guys pick it up, and then another guy comes in and he takes it, and the police start chasing him, and then one of the police officers gets murdered. I'm like, oh my gosh, this movie's gonna be awesome, and then it became the most boring, stiff, dull, amateurish movie ever. Even for a movie from like 1963, it felt really old-fashioned, even for that time period. Um, like, oh my gosh, I would almost recommend you watch it just because of how like dull and bad it is, and just like how like earlier when we were talking about American Sniper, how on the nose some of the dialogue was. Like this was somehow worse than than that.
And it's on the Criterion Collection.
It wasn't. It's one of those ones where it's not on DVD or video wherever but they have the rights to it. So so I don't know what they've seen in it, but I thought it was pretty pretty dull.
Yeah.
But in good news, this week they're showing a couple movies featuring the actress. I'm gonna try to not butcher her name, but Setsuko Hara. Japanese actress. She's worked with Kurosawa, and then the one filmmaker that I watched a couple of his films with is, and again, I'm going to try not to butcher his name too, but it's Yasujiro Ozu, who apparently like Kurosawa is like the #1 Japanese director. Then I guess he's like #2, and his movies are, I guess in Japan they have this genre of like house movies, which are basically like domestic dramas and stuff like that. So the two that I watched were Tokyo Story and Late Spring, and they're both really kind of simple stories and really simply told. Like the camera never moves. It's kind of always set on the same level, like not that high off the ground and whatever. And the movies kind of take like the first hour, it kind of takes you a little bit of time to get into, but like afterwards, and the more I'm kind of thinking of them, the more it's like, oh my gosh, like it's starting to resonate with me on an emotional level, even though there's a whole cultural divide between what I've experienced and what these stories have. So they're worth checking out if you can, if you're into those types of movies. But they're very well done for something that seemed really kind of simple on the surface, and yet, like I said, hours later, it's like, oh, like there's a lot more depth and emotion to it than you kind of initially take away from it. So those are both worth checking out.
And that was Tokyo Story and Late Spring.
Yes. Yep.
Um, is the movie early summer related to late spring?
Oh, so I guess he has. I haven't watched any of those, but I guess he does a bunch of movies that are kind of connected to the seasons or whatever. So I think there's one that's like early autumn, and there's like a whole series of movies that technically don't have anything to do with each other than like he basically equates certain seasons of the year with like what these characters are going through in their lives. So like,
It's kind of thematically related, but
yeah,
not.
so if it's like a marriage story, it's probably takes place in the spring. If it's something to do with death, it's probably in the fall, and stuff like that.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Well, that kind of wraps up what we've watched recently. I don't think. Actually, do you know what Joe's watched recently?
Probably something ridiculous.
Yeah.
They have I guess this is the time to plug Film Literates. They just him and Alex just finished their two-part raid review, which is pretty entertaining. So
Yeah, it's pretty good.
I highly suggest people check that out and previous episodes of Film Literates. We'll probably put a link somewhere.
Yeah, the beginning of the second raid installment made me laugh pretty hard.
Yeah.
And if you listen to the podcast, I feel like all the people who listen to the podcast are people we know at this point. But if you listen to the podcast and don't know what Joe looks like, this is a good chance to find out what Joe looks like.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's move on to some film news. Not too much film news. There's just one thing we want to talk about, and Nick, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, and this really isn't news so much as it is a rumor, but obviously a couple of years ago, George Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney, and so obviously we know we're getting more Star Wars movies after that, but one of kind of the big projects associated with Lucasfilm that hasn't really been talked about is Indiana Jones. And there have been a couple of rumors over the years, but I think Disney right now is putting all their focus into Star Wars. That being said, over the past year, there've kind of been a couple of names that have popped out. I think like 6 months ago, there was a rumor that they wanted Bradley Cooper for Indiana Jones, and now there's a new rumor for Chris Pratt as Indiana Jones. I don't think there's any substance to this yet. I think it's basically just people being like, oh, we would like, this is a name that we like, and so we'll put them on a list, and then we'll get to it when we get to it.
Dude, so just real quick, I had not heard that Bradley Cooper was an option.
Oh yeah.
And that to me, I would be more interested in seeing than Chris Pratt as Indiana Jones. But
yeah, because I like Chris Pratt. I don't think him in Guardians mode is what I want to see for another interpretation of Indiana Jones, because contrary to what a couple other people I know have said, I'm perfectly okay with them making more Indiana Jones movies without Harrison Ford, because I was always under the impression that Indiana Jones is basically the American James Bond, and I actually remember growing up and kind of like all the movies kind of blended to get together in my head. So I always thought there was more than 3 movies, and then you kind of get to the point where it's like, oh, it is just 3 movies, and it was always like, oh, I just thought there were more. So I'm more than willing to see these different interpretations, but I'm not sure. I think Jurassic World will go a long way in showing how Chris Pratt handles, I guess, being a slightly more serious type of actor. Well, because he obviously has played serious characters, but I think of that caliber.
Yeah, I just can't see him as Indiana Jones, man. Like I definitely not in Guardians of the Galaxy mode. Even more so not in Parks and Recreation mode.
Yeah.
And I honestly think, even just judging by the trailers so far of Jurassic World, that it's a stretch, but it's a stretch I'm willing to buy and see how it goes.
Yeah,
but
I will say the Super Bowl ad.
Yeah,
I thought was better for his performance than the first trailer was.
for sure. Because it kind of gave him a chance to sort of show him in distress a little bit, and you were like, oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
I don't know, like there's just something. I'd almost there's a podcast I was listening to where they were like, guys, the real question with this story is, what about Shia LaBeouf? And I laughed, but at the same time, in my head, I don't have this thing against Shia LaBeouf, so
no, I don't either.
I was like, I would watch it if Shia LaBeouf was like his son doing the same thing, like I
Yeah,
would
yeah.
totally watch that. So I don't know. Everyone seems to have this hatred for that aspect of the last Indiana Jones movie. I wasn't as, I didn't hate it as much, and I would. This is weird, I guess, for a lot of people, but I'd rather see Shia LaBeouf than Chris Pratt. So
Because I think the big thing there is he would be a completely different character. You
yeah,
know.
that's true. And I guess that's almost what I feel like. Like, is Indiana Jones supposed to be James Bond?
Well,
Um,
I mean, that was the idea. I mean, it was kind of like um, George Lucas made Star Wars because he couldn't remake Flash Gordon, and they kind of made Indiana Jones because they wouldn't let Steven Spielberg do a James Bond movie. And that was kind of, and I think like uh, a lot of people get very protective of Harrison Ford's Indiana Jones and whatever because it took them so long to do something after The Last Crusade, and then people didn't care for Crystal Skull and whatever. But to me, I was always like, I always thought he was just a character, like gosh, like Doc Savage or whatever. Those other characters that he's basically based on, and you could do different actors and slightly different styles and whatever. But because they've done so few movies, I don't think they've really explored that option.
yeah, I don't know, man. I feel like I'd rather see almost a different character at this point. But I guess I'm not. I'm fine with them doing like a different story, I guess, and making it like James Bond. I just don't really want to see a reboot where I'm expected to believe that Chris Pratt is Harrison Ford's same character.
I think if they do it in the same ways, like like all the James Bond movies, like kind of sort of don't really take place in the same universe, but they do. It's kind of one of those things where you just kind of like, oh, it just keeps going, and like you just kind of update the continuity. Like it doesn't, you're not saying, oh, what I did in this movie reflects what we did 15 movies back, but it's kind of like, oh, this is kind of connected to the one we did right before, but whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know.
Is there anyone out there today that you would think would be a good replacement?
All the people I can think of are like too old. Um,
Tom Selleck is still he's waiting by the phone.
well, I was thinking like I could have seen someone like oh, who am I thinking? Oh, I could have seen like Hugh Jackman be an
Oh,
interesting
yeah.
Indiana Jones, but he's too old now. I feel like.
Yeah.
Um,
Plus, he's
uh,
gonna be Wolverine for the next 10 years still probably.
yeah, exactly. But someone like that, I feel like would have been interesting. There there isn't really anyone right now like younger male actors
Yeah.
that I could see playing it. What about you?
I can't really think of anyone right now. I'd have to seriously think about it longer. But because it's an interesting character to pull off because he's got to be a tough guy. He's got to have a sense of humor, but he also has to look good getting beat up and falling down on his ass all the time. Because that's kind of the thing that's great about Indiana Jones is he gets himself in these situations, then immediately realizes that he's over his head. But
Yeah,
still gets it.
I could see Luke Evans doing it. But there's like a bunch of British people that I could see doing it if they can do an American accent.
Yeah.
uh,
Jason Statham is.
yeah, exactly. No, I could not see Jason Statham. But
I couldn't either. But now that I've said that, like I want to see that, but just like as like a fake trailer. Like that's it.
yeah, so that would be pretty funny if Indiana Jones is like flipping over cars and like, I don't know, like crank style action in Indiana Jones. I think people would be upset.
It's interesting that we're having a hard time thinking of names because I mean that's kind of a general thing is that like the action stars of like the 80s, which was like Harrison Ford, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, like there aren't people like that anymore. It's people who I guess are more versatile, like the fact that like a Chris Pratt can be an action hero or a Bradley Cooper, or someone like that.
Yeah, it's weird because 10 years ago you probably could have picked out like Matt Damon, and even I mean like Robert Downey Jr. is a good pick 15 years ago, but he's too old now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's got his own franchise thing going. So I don't know. Like it's weird that there aren't as many choices, especially in American actors. I feel like.
Who would be interesting, but I don't think like obviously this is kind of like pushing, this is kind of going outside the who the character kind of is. This would kind of redefine him, but it would almost be interesting to get more of like an Oscar Isaac type,
Oh yeah.
someone who has more of a sly kind of sarcastic probably sense of humor, like I guess that's what I'm kind of looking for though. Is if they do it again, like don't get Spielberg 2.0 to direct it. Like get someone who's going to bring something slightly different. Like get like I don't know, you get someone who's a little more interesting. Not saying that Spielberg's not interesting, but we kind of know what that type of movie is.
Yeah.
And get an actor who like you can be like, oh, he can be Indiana Jones, but it's not someone doing an impersonation of Harrison Ford.
Yeah. I could see. I would see Idris Elba playing Indiana Jones.
You see, my only problem with that isn't it's not so much a problem with Idris Elba as the fact that like he's always the go-to for like everything, and it's like there are other there are other types of actors I feel like that could Idris Elba I feel like is one of the whenever any part comes up I feel like for the past 10 years his name's always on that list. And
That's because he's badass.
That's
because he's awesome. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. I don't know that. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what I would want to see from another Indiana Jones movie because I was totally fine with the last Indiana Jones movie and everyone else was super pissed off. So
yeah.
So I'm almost like afraid to say.
What? Yeah, but I think you could find a lot of cool people who've done like smaller movies that could pull off another one because like that's the thing that I think a lot of people forget is like we think of Indiana Jones as this big blockbuster thing, but if you kind of read how they did Raiders of the Lost Ark, it was very much, Steven Spielberg had done 1941 and it had been like a huge disaster, and the budget on that ran over, and they were shooting for forever. And Raiders was like his opportunity to do something small and quick and dirty and whatever. So it's like find someone from that world, have them do it as kind of a similar approach, and then see what you get.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, I think that's it for that, right? Do we have anything else you want to say about that? All right, yeah, let's move along to our review of Jupiter Ascending.
Not Jupiter Rising, Jupiter Ascending.
That's right, Jupiter Ascending.
Your word.
I wanted to change the name to Jupiter Absconding. Which, after watching the movie, she does abscond a lot. So
yeah.
For those who don't know, absconding is to leave a room quickly. So, but So Nick, what did you think of Jupiter Ascending?
Okay, I think before I say what I thought of the movie, I think I should kind of preface and say kind of what I think of the Wachowskis, because I think like that's kind of whether you like or don't like this movie, I think is somewhat related to what you think of their movies. And to me, I've always kind of enjoyed their output, even if I don't care for the film itself, if that makes any sense. Like I'm always glad that they're out there doing what they want to do, and that people let them do what they want to do, even if I'm not immediately like the audience for it. That being said, I love the first Matrix movie. I'm a pretty big fan of Cloud Atlas. I think like all their other stuff to different degrees succeeds in certain ways and doesn't. And I think Jupiter Ascending kind of is no different. Like it's a tough movie to kind of explain, so I'll keep it really brief. But like I can't really defend it, but I really kind of enjoyed myself for how goofy and outrageous it kind of was in the moment. And there was also some cool stuff that they did. So I think that's like that's kind of how I can explain it in brief.
Okay. Well, so you kind of liked it.
Yes.
Okay.
But like kind of the bare minimum that I can like something like this.
Yeah, I'm not a very big fan of the Wachowskis. Like the Matrix is cool, but I think the second two Matrixes blow pretty hard. And Speed Racer is like painful to watch. It's like an annoying movie to watch. And then Cloud Atlas was boring to me. I just there and I all that philosophical stuff about like reincarnation and stuff is just not interesting to me. But Jupiter Ascending, I really enjoyed. So there are definitely some like over the top like goofy elements to this movie, but I really enjoyed the story. There were a lot of things like there were a lot of plot points that I called, but as a whole, I thought the kind of the kind of more interesting sci-fi plot that a lot of people have gotten like upset or annoyed about, or like written off the movie for being stupid about. I really appreciated because it was like instead of just giving us a bad guy who wants power, they gave us a bad guy who wants, or a few bad guys who want power, but for like specific reasons. And like specific, the power that they want is very specific,
It's
and I
actually
appreciated that. What's that?
the interesting thing about that is that it's a more interesting version of the plot for the Phantom Menace, basically, because it's basic when you think about it, it's all about trade and ownership of planets and selling and buying stuff.
Yeah, it reminded me a lot of that, but I think this was considerably better than that.
Yes, I agree in terms of that, and I think as weird as this sounds, I think like the my inner pulp fan loved the fact that it was like royal families like trying to backstab each other and stuff. Like I don't know, like that's like if you have a movie and there's like royalty and there's like a royal wedding and someone has to like interrupt it and there's like an act like stuff like that, like I love sequences like that. So this movie worked on that level for me.
I really I think the movie worked on a lot more levels for me than it didn't work. There were some goofy parts and I think some of the writing was a little awkward sometimes, but there were a lot of like really smart things I feel like too. Like I appreciated little things. I liked the bee scene where like the beans the bees recognize their queen and everything. I was like, oh,
Well,
that's cool.
Sean Bean is part B, so you were correct in flubbing up and saying beans.
Yeah, the beans, the Sean Beans. But and then like the idea that the most common aliens on planet Earth looked like what everyone thinks the Area 51 alien looked like,
Yeah.
stuff like that I thought was like, okay, I get what they're sort of trying to do. And then once they got away, I found everything about the world very interesting and very well produced. Like they clearly had a huge budget for it, and I thought the set design and stuff like that was really good. Some of the effects maybe not as strong, specifically in scenes where they're just standing and talking. But overall, like I really like this movie, and I have an interesting thing that I want to bring up because I saw it with my fiance.
Okay.
And she liked it. The first thing she said once the movie was over, she said, and I didn't even bring this up, I wouldn't have even necessarily compared the two, but she said, I liked that way more than I liked Guardians of the Galaxy.
Okay, that's interesting because I remember my first thought coming out of the theater was this is the movie that people feared Guardians of the Galaxy would be. Like people thought it would be like weird and whatever and wouldn't be able to get into it. Because like on paper, one movie it's like, oh, there's a talking tree, there's a talking raccoon. On the other hand, it's like Channing Tatum is a wolf-man hybrid, and like there's all this like I remember going to the theater and there were trailers for Jupiter Ascending, and everyone just kind of being like, what is this,
Yeah.
So that's really interesting, actually.
And I think, to be perfectly honest, if you look at both movies as sci-fi films, I think this is a better sci-fi movie. And
Yeah.
like, and that's actually another interesting thing. I read this article on Yahoo, and the headline was literally something like, "Sci-fi movies need to stop being trying to be smart." And I was like, well, don't we all feel stupid? But they were talking about how movies like this, and then movies like movies like Cloud Atlas, which the Wachowskis also did, but even to me, movies like Edge of Tomorrow are getting snubbed at the box office because they're not part of these existing franchises that are like built to reach adults and kids.
Yeah.
Jupiter Ascending and Cloud Atlas are not made for kids, and you can tell they're way too complicated for kids to understand what's going on. That doesn't mean you can't bring a kid to Jupiter Ascending necessarily, and they can't enjoy the action or something like that. But you can tell that the plot is not built for the plot is not built to sell merchandise to children.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas when you go see Guardians of the Galaxy, you very much feel that, I think. And I really appreciated that about the movie, and I really liked the movie. Now, as a whole, I think Guardians of the Galaxy is a better complete experience. I think there's some plot holes in this one that are never fully explained. There's, like I said, there's some weird dialogue written in, and there's some uneven performances.
Yeah. My biggest problem, going off your plot hole comment, is that the movie sometimes moves too fast and then other times too slow, and there's a lot of times where characters will disappear and then there's no resolution. Like there's that, without giving too much away, there's the opening scene where the three siblings, which is Eddie Redmayne, Douglas Booth, and their sister, I don't remember the actress who plays her, and they're together in the beginning, and then they each have individual sequences built around them, but then they never once you leave one of those characters, you never really come back to them,
Right, and I'm pretty sure part of that is that they were hoping to build up for a sequel.
Maybe, but even
where they could bring them back in.
Yeah, there's no last scene where it's this is where this character leaves off. It's just all right, we're done here, let's go.
That was actually kind of funny because when you get to Eddie Redmayne's part in the end of the movie, when Jupiter's walking into the hall or whatever, I leaned over and said to Jamie, I was like, "Final boss," because that is kind of how the movie runs. You have the first boss who's kind of easy to get away from, and you think something crappy's going on, but it's whatever. And then the second boss is oh shoot, they're really trying to do something horrible, and then the third boss is batshit crazy,
Yeah.
But that's kind of how the movie ran for me a little bit. But sorry, go ahead.
Speaking of batshit crazy, I think we have to talk about Eddie Redmayne.
Oh my gosh, my theater was laughing every time. I couldn't help but laugh, and
it's so great.
It's unfortunate that there's so few scenes of him doing it.
I know, that's what it feels like he's barely in 10 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, and I just wanted more scenes of him being it's totally freaking out for no reason.
It makes no sense, but it's so great. And he's on a completely different level than any of the other. It's one of those things where I hate to call it a bad performance because I think he's doing exactly what he was probably told to do.
Right.
It's it's just so, I don't know, I can't classify it.
Yeah, it's to be perfectly honest, I think part of it is Mila Kunis. She I don't think she does a bad job in the movie, but she always has a way about her that seems very modern, the way she talks and the way she says things, and everyone else around her isn't. It's the same issue I had with her performance in Oz the Great and Powerful.
Oh yeah.
Everyone else is super British and very refined and speaking very professionally, and then she's just in there "What's up, guys? Hey."
Yeah, which I think to a
Call
certain
me
extent
Jupe.
is intentional.
Wait, sorry.
I think to a certain extent that's intentional, but I will agree I don't think it entirely works. I think the idea is there, but the execution isn't.
Yeah, I would agree. She has that line where she walks in and they're like, Your Majesty, blah 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 blah, and she's like, "Oh, just call me Jupe," and I was like, nobody in the whole movie has called you that. Why would suddenly someone call you that?
Yeah.
That for some reason that line really bugged the crap out of me, but Yeah, I don't know. Like I just really enjoyed the movie. There's some really cool action scenes for sure, and it's just kind of like this type of there's this vision and this story that I don't know that we've ever seen in that way before, which I just really appreciated. In a landscape that's sort of filled with a lot of superhero movies and stuff that already exists. I'd rather see more stuff like this. So I guess I know what you mean by really appreciating what the Wachowskis do in going out there and trying to make their own stuff.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't know. It's kind of depressing to think that Edge of Tomorrow last year bombed when that is an awesome movie. Like that, I can't even get around that. Like that is a way better movie than this movie. Um, and neither of these movies are going to do well, and that's kind of depressing.
Yeah.
And it means that less of these movies are going to get made, and instead we're going to get 8 more Star Wars movies, which, for Star Wars fans is great, but for, like, I don't know, I would rather see the next Star Wars, like the next thing that changes cinema
Mhm.
and the way people go see movies, rather than see the same Star Wars stuff
Yeah.
8 more times. Or
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe in addition to seeing that, you know?
Yeah. Diversity. You always want diversity.
Yeah, exactly. So I would encourage anyone who is mildly interested in this movie to go check it out because I think it's worth watching. I think it's enjoyable. I don't think it's nearly as bad as Rotten Tomatoes or a lot of other places, or even the box office would have you believe it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, especially if you enjoy like interesting sci-fi, I'd say check it out. It's kind of funny. It's probably more. The movie felt a little more like Ender's Game. Even that action sequence with all the battle hammers or whatever they call them when they're trying to get to the wedding.
Hmm.
That
I
felt
still
like a
haven't
scene out of
seen.
Ender.
I still haven't seen Ender's Game, but you're not the first person I've heard make that comment.
Yeah. Anyway, do we want to talk about spoilers?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Then from this point on, we're gonna be discussing spoilers. So if you want to see the movie but don't want it spoiled, stop listening now. And again, check out our website, the-letterbox.com, and review our podcast. Yeah. So what do you want to talk about for spoilers?
I think the biggest spoiler is that Sean Bean doesn't die in this movie.
It is. That is a pretty. I feel like they wrote that in specifically.
Yeah. But I like that. I actually really dug Sean Bean in this movie, even though I thought his character wasn't all that clear to me anyway. Like I felt like there's a part in the movie where it feels like it felt like the third Pirates of the Caribbean movie where there's like betrayal on top of betrayal on top of betrayal. Um, so I had no idea what he was up to, but I kind of liked his whole attitude.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. His character was really cool. There were 2 betrayals. There was the bounty hunters betraying their own team member to take Jupiter to the sister,
mhm.
and then there was Sean Bean betraying Channing Tatum to take Jupiter to Titus.
But then there was one more because then Sean Bean's character winds up in prison or some. I feel like there was another one in there somewhere.
I guess Sean Bean then betrays Titus.
Yeah, it always got really confusing because it was like, wait, Titus hired Channing Tatum to like. It got really confusing to be like who was hiring who and who was um, yeah, that was a little confusing. Um,
Yeah, that was the plot in general was a tad confusing.
Although
but
you actually brought up one of my when I was talking about characters coming and going without resolution, the bounty hunters. I wish there had been more of them because when they leave the movie, it's like there could have been like one more scene with them, because I thought they looked cool.
yeah,
Um,
um, yeah, they were interesting. I don't know that I need another scene with them though.
but it just felt like again, it was that thing where like it felt like you need another scene because it felt like they left without any fanfare. It was like they got. I mean, I guess they got paid and left, and I guess that makes sense. But you kind of expect in those types of movies, like they get killed, or like, oh, they're gonna stick around, or they're gonna whatever. So I mean, that might have just been my expectation, but it kind of felt like there was gonna be more of them. I guess especially because they really are only in the first third of the movie.
I felt like the script as a whole could have used a couple more like rewrites. Where like I feel like you could have condensed some of the characters and made it just a little bit tighter, and less confusing. Like, I don't know, where like
Yeah, well,
Tatum could have been one of the bounty hunters or something like that.
yeah, I mean, I don't know how confirmed it is, but there's a rumor going around that various early drafts of the script were anywhere between 200 and 600 pages.
Wow.
So yeah, but I get what you mean. But yeah, it felt like some scenes need to be condensed, and then other scenes was like, wait, I wanted a little more of that. So it was an interesting cherry picking of kind of ideas that they decided they want to run along with, as opposed to the ones where it was like, oh, but I want to watch that and not this. But
Yeah. That action sequence early on in Chicago, that was pretty awesome.
Yeah, and that one's pretty interesting because I remember reading that they shot like a little bit of it every day for like 6 months. And it's funny because it's a scene that seems like it's heavily reliant on CG, but there were certain shots where I'm convinced that they, not some of the super complicated stuff, but some of it where like it really looked like they probably had them attached to wires and had them flying along a skyscraper.
Yeah, like you're convinced that they blew up that church with the spaceships.
No, not that bit. But no, there's certain shots where it's very simple. There aren't like spaceships or anything, where it's just Jupiter and Kane flying, and it looks like they probably just hooked up the actors to wires and just had them, swinging around the buildings and stuff like that, which is kind of cool in a movie like this, where you're kind of like, even if you believe the CG, you still know it's CG. So when you get like shots like that, it's like, oh, that actually looks kind of real,
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was probably my favorite action set piece. I also noticed that the Wachowskis have a thing about people flying away into the sky at the end of their movies.
Yeah. Which actually, speaking of flying, I love that we have gravity boots in this movie, because I feel like gravity boots are one of those like classic bits of sci-fi technology that were like really popular in the 80s, like the 50s to 80s or whatever. But I feel like we don't see them in movies anymore. So it was like, oh yeah, gravity boots. Like it felt like, I guess it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to think of this as like a feature-length version of one of those random short-lived 80s cartoon science fiction shows,
Yeah, I was just, while I was watching the movie, I was imagining them filming some of the scenes where Channing Tatum is using those like inside. I was like, he's just riding around this set on rollerblades with his shirt off. Like, what kind of a scene is this? Yeah, but it was the gravity boots were pretty badass. Yeah. The wings at the end were kind of weird.
That's just imagine 20 years later, it's Birdman.
Yeah, exactly. Dude, that was when there's this scene where they talk about the wings for the first time, and she's like, "You had wings?" And I was like, "Uh-oh, is this Maleficent?" I was like, "Shoot, I did not want to see this movie again." So anyway, yeah, I don't know. I still think the movie was pretty fun, and I would probably watch it again if somebody was like, "Hey, you want to watch this movie?" I'd be like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" And it's not that long either. It didn't feel like crazy long to me. So, did it feel super long to you?
No, I mean it didn't feel super long. I mean it felt its length, but it didn't feel longer or shorter.
Yeah. Well, I think that. Do you have anything else you want to say about it?
The elephant guy was pretty cool.
He was in it for like 1.5 shots.
There's actually I'm gonna have to link it, because there's someone did one of those fake interviews with the character. It's really kind of funny, but it's really stupid. I'll put it in the link though.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's gonna wrap up our podcast for today. Again, you can find more episodes of Outside the Letterbox on our website, the-letterbox.com. You can also find articles and film analysis and criticism from me, Nick, and Joe on there. You should definitely check out Joe's Film Illiterate series. He works pretty hard on it, and it's pretty funny. So check it out. You can leave us a review on iTunes or comment on our site. And don't forget to use the hashtag QualityFilm this week. That's pretty much it. Anything else, Nick?
Nope, that's it. What are we? I think next week probably review Kingsman.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about Oscars too next week, aren't we?
Yeah.
Make our Oscar bets.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tune in next week. Hopefully that'll actually happen.
Yeah.